Welcome back to Democracy Docket's 2024 Candid Q&A series. My name is Crystal Hill, and today I'm joined by Tennessee State Representative Gloria Johnson, who's running to unseat incumbent Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn in the Senate. We talked about the Tennessee Three, voting rights in the state and turnout, and why she believes she's better for the state than Blackburn. Thank you so much for joining us today, Representative Johnson. Just to start, the election's already underway. Tennesseans are heading to the polls. Early voting has started. Tell us why Tennesseans should get your support in this race.
Well, I mean, it's so important that we elect someone who works for Tennessee families, because what we're seeing right now is we have a U.S. Senator who votes against everything that Tennessee family needs, who thinks that a $7.25 minimum wage is okay. That's just not acceptable. No one can live on $7.25. Someone who has voted against capping insulin at $35 and voting against negotiating drug prices for seniors. Tennessee is one of the top 4 states in the country with incidences of diabetes. And we're not going to cap insulin at $35 for Tennessee families who are struggling. I mean, it boggles the mind. Why would somebody do that? But then you find out that my opponent is number 2 in the Senate in accepting dollars from Big Pharma, has taken almost $2 million from Big Pharma. So we have a U.S. Senator that is not working for Tennessee, and she's working for lobbyists and corporations.
And I mean, I've seen other interviewers point this out, that Tennessee hasn't elected a Democrat in, I think, over 2 decades. Do you think that Tennessee is ready for something different?
I think that they are. I mean, I'm certainly seeing that as I travel to all 95 counties across the state, really made a commitment to go everywhere and talk to everyone and go where they don't expect you to come. Because, we've had such great attendance and people are fed up. They are fed up that women in Tennessee are no longer equal. They are fed up that we are doing nothing about gun violence when we do not have to live this way. Our families and our kids don't have to live this way. No other country lives this way. We can honor the Second Amendment by putting in protections that protect our kids and our communities.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk more about kind of what you just said. It seems like throughout the race, you have framed it as, you understanding Tennesseans and really being for the people, and Blackburn being out of touch. I've heard people say, she hasn't held a town hall in quite some time. And notably, you wanted to debate Blackburn and she did not participate. And so I want to talk more about that. Why do you feel that Blackburn is out of touch? And, why should Tennesseans trust you instead?
Well, because the reality is this. We have polling across the state from multiple outlets that tell you that 81% of Tennesseans want cannabis reform, that 84% of Tennesseans want paid family leave, and that 63% of Tennesseans want Medicaid expansion, and that more than 60% want us to invest in our public schools, not privatize our public schools on voucher scams. Overwhelmingly, citizens fall with us. Overwhelmingly, all parties agree we need to raise the wage. They may differ on what you raise it to, but all parties agree with a majority that we should raise the wage. And Marsha Blackburn is against every one of those things. We believe in expanding Medicaid and making sure people have access to affordable prescriptions. She's literally voted to repeal the ACA multiple times with no replacement. She wants to go back to a time when being a woman was a pre-existing condition. And if you had a pre-existing condition, you could not get care. And do away with 40 million Americans' insurance. I mean, this is not something that regular hardworking families need. I'm tired of my politicians being multimillionaires. And I think that we need elected leaders who understand what it's like on a daily basis to strive to pay your bills and do what's necessary. You know, it's just, I understand how most Tennesseans live, that the majority of Tennesseans are one car problem away from bankruptcy, or one medical problem away from bankruptcy for sure. We're one of the highest in the country with medical bankruptcy because we haven't expanded Medicaid. Tennesseans are out there, they're working 2 and 3 jobs, trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep food on the table for their families, and they don't have time to follow their politicians and hold them accountable. They just expect them to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's not happening. And what politicians in Tennessee want you to believe is, well, the fact that 2 women are married down the street, that's why your family is struggling. No, your family is struggling because Tennessee prides itself on being a low-wage state. And Tennessee doesn't believe you should make a living wage. And Tennessee is not fully funding our public schools to make sure your child has a well-resourced classroom no matter their zip code. And the Tennessee supermajority and the Tennessee Republicans in D.C. are not fighting for access to health care and affordable prescriptions. That's why you're struggling. Don't get caught up in these wedge issues that just seek to divide, because Republican politics is a politics of division. They only can use wedge issues, they other people, just to divide us. And people, so many people in the state aren't aware that it's Republican policy that is just making them barely able to survive. And Democratic policy is going to make those regular Tennessee families thrive.
Mhm. And I wanted to talk about turnout because, you know, with early voting, local news outlets have been reporting fairly high numbers for turnout. But, you know, we know that Tennessee, you know, compared to other states, has ranked low historically for turnout. And this election is
51st.
obviously, 51st. Wow.
Yes.
Oh, wow. I'm familiar with Indiana and other states, but I didn't realize that Tennessee was at 51. You know, oh wow. And you know, given how historic this election is, and how much is at stake, are you confident that Tennesseans, you know, will turn out and vote?
I mean, I hope that they will. I've seen a whole lot of people who have hope who didn't before. You know, one thing that we know is in 2018, when Marsha Blackburn was last elected, she won by just a little over 200,000 votes. And demographics in Tennessee have changed a little bit since then. In addition to that, we know there are 300,000 typically Democratic voters who haven't voted in several cycles, who didn't vote in 2018. So our goal is to get those 300,000 voters back to voting. You talk to people and they feel like, well, it doesn't matter, I vote and nothing changes for me. And we've got to show them that there is hope. And if you elect the right people, we can make it better for just regular, hardworking families. And that's what we so want to do. So we hope we're getting that message out. I know we're going to see a difference. At what level it is, I don't know. In a general election, you know, there's some counties that are doing better and a few counties that aren't doing as well. And so you're not sure who's getting to the polls and who's not. And so it's all just kind of a wait and see. But I have talked to hundreds and thousands of people who are not feeling the same way they have in the past. And in addition, Tennessee has registered 200,000 new voters for this election cycle. And 60% of them are 18 to 34. So that's a good sign. And it's kind of cool because a lot of the voting facilities, when somebody comes in and they're a new voter, everybody just stops what they're doing. They announce, we've got a first time voter, and everybody claps. It's kind of cool. A lot of young people have told me that, you know, on their first vote, they had everybody at the polling place cheer for them. But, you know, we're
I love
also
that.
dealing. Yeah, it's great. And we're also dealing, though, with a whole lot of voter suppression here. Something that our Secretary of State that did this year borders on illegal. I mean, there's nothing in the code that allows what they did. They sent a letter to over 14,000 naturalized citizens, saying they might be committing a felony if they vote. And then at the end of the letter, it invited them to remove themselves from the roll if they were afraid of that happening. And at last count, it's been months since I heard this, but 300 or more than 300 had removed themselves from the rolls. Naturalized citizens register to vote right after their ceremony. But here's the tricky thing they did. They only checked these new citizens, they only checked their immigration status based on DMV records. And those don't get updated. They know they don't get updated with immigration status. They could have checked it with other databases, but they didn't. They checked it with the one database that doesn't update with immigration status. And it's outrageous.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I remember we spoke right around the time that was happening. We covered it for Democracy Docket, and since then it seems like this sort of push against suspected non-citizens voting has only intensified. And even Senator Blackburn, I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to ask, she had pushed for the SAVE Act to pass, which would have had a requirement that non-citizens, can't vote, even though it's already illegal under federal law. So it does seem like, she has aligned herself with this Republican-led push to, I guess, crack down on.
She's Donald Trump's biggest cheerleader. There's no question about that. Always has been. And she has always been. She is spreading misinformation. She spreads misinformation about voting. And let me tell you, I'll just be really honest. I firmly believe that there were two reasons for these letters. I think the first was to scare people, to get people to remove themselves from the roll and scare people from even going to vote. In Knox County, at our polling places, there were these yellow signs with black lettering in English and in Spanish that said you could be committing a felony if you are voting. And on top of getting those letters, that is pretty outrageous. I think that it was to discourage people who might be naturalized citizens from going to vote in the first time. And also, I think after this election, when the numbers don't look the way they think they should, they're going to claim. I can almost guarantee that it's going to happen. And so I've been talking about it a lot. So if they try it, I'll be on record as saying, watch for this.
And so we were talking about, the letters that were sent to suspected non-citizens in Tennessee. A lot of Democrats who we've spoken with who are seeking elected office in Congress, have said that voting rights will be a priority. Like they've talked about the John Lewis Act, they've talked about the Freedom to Vote Act. Senator Blackburn, for her part, in 2022, spoke out against legislation that would have expanded voter access. If you are elected to the Senate, would that be a priority for you as far as, expanding voting rights on the national level?
Absolutely a priority. We have got to vote for H1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to get back to nonpartisan redistricting, because gerrymandering is really what is damaging Tennessee and leading to extremists only in the supermajority of our government. Because we have elected officials choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their elected officials. And we know that when districts are so gerrymandered, you get the most extreme form of government. So we've got a Republican supermajority that are drunk on power. Sometimes people say to the Democrats, why don't y'all walk out? If we walked out, they could still pass anything they wanted to. And so the reality is we've got to be in there to fight. And, but we have got to flip this house, because these folks are bringing legislation that literally no one asks about. To hear Marsha Blackburn tell it, the only issues in this state are immigration and transgender women in sports. And the reality is not a single transgender woman has tried to play a woman's sport in Tennessee. And so that they're using these things to divide and other people, when the things that are hitting families the most are wages and not having access to affordable health care and not having a well-resourced classroom in their school. And she wants to do away with the Department of Education that funds free and reduced lunch for Tennessee kids that go to bed hungry, that funds special ed programs. Like, I taught special ed for 27 years. My special ed kids graduated with regular ed diplomas because they got the programs they needed to make them successful on graduation. They went to 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, or applied technology schools, and some of them did 20 years in the military because they got the programs they needed so they would be successful. She wants to do away with all of those things. Those are the things that Tennessee families need. They need childcare desperately. We have childcare deserts all across this state. They need paid family leave so that when they want to have a child, heck, in a forced birth state, you think you would provide time for mothers and fathers to care for those babies. But that's not what we're seeing. And so Tennesseans are struggling. And they're just running roughshod over them and voting based on what lobbyists tell them. Lobbyists write their bills and they pass them. And that's not how our government is supposed to work. That's not what representation looks like. And Marsha Blackburn doesn't even respect the human dignity of the majority of Tennesseans. She doesn't respect the human dignity of women. She doesn't respect the human dignity of the disabled community or senior citizens or Black and brown communities or the LGBTQ community. I believe at least you should respect the human dignity of every person you're representing. You don't have to agree with them, but you need to hear them out, hear their side, and you need to listen to people, not just talk out them. And she will not listen. She won't do a town hall. She won't do a debate. And of course, if I was someone who 2 days before Hurricane Helene voted against hurricane relief and voted to shut down the government, I'd probably run from the press too, because how do you answer for that when so many East Tennesseans lost everything they had?
Yeah, Tennessee was among the states hardest hit by the storm. And, I recall when we spoke this summer, you said that Tennesseans, are tired of the status quo, are tired of suppression tactics, but how does Tennessee, I guess, get past that, with, as you
Like,
noted out,
how does it
I'm sorry?
translate into votes? And that, like, how does it translate
Yeah,
into the votes or people? Yeah, I
because,
think that's the tough part.
oh, I'm so
Go
sorry.
ahead. I didn't let you finish your question.
Oh, no. I just wanted to also point out, that, if you are convicted of a certain, felony offense, that you can't vote, or you have to kind of go through this kind of arduous process to vote. And then we talked about the letters and naturalized citizens kind of getting these sort of intimidating messages and kind of being more wary
Right.
possibly of
And
voting.
then not allowing student IDs as a form of ID to vote
Yeah.
when the professors from the same university can use their IDs from that university to vote, but students can't use their state school ID to vote.
Oh, I did not even realize that.
Yep.
About like professors.
You can use your gun permit to vote, though.
Your gun permit. Wow. It's and it's as far as kind of working to combat, I guess, those type of laws, it just seems like it's this uphill battle. Like, I saw that you sponsored with other Democrats legislation that would have helped it or would have made it easier for
Yeah.
formerly convicted people to get their rights restored, but that didn't really go far. In an overwhelmingly Republican legislature, do you think that there could ever be bipartisan support for expanding access?
I have some real concern with what they're going to come up with this year, because what happened, I believe that if you have served your time for the crime that you did, that you should have your voting rights reinstated. One thing that they do here is make sure that you can't have any outstanding child support. Well, it's really hard to keep up on child support if you have been locked up. And to me, that seems like a violation because you're not penalizing folks in general who aren't paying child support. They get their voting rights. It's just only if you've been convicted of a felony and you haven't paid child support, then you lose your voting rights. It seems perhaps there's some legality to me where you're only making that requirement of felons, not of folks in the general population. So I think that's a problem. And then in addition, they just clarified our voting law about the restoration process is outrageous and complicated. But they've complicated it more last year just by reinterpreting it. And they said that, well, you actually have to get your gun rights back before you can get your voting rights back. And I'm not a lawyer, so, but I don't see that interpretation that way. And they're making some interesting interpretations of the law in order to make it more difficult or just to retaliate, really, quite frankly. And so those efforts, last year, there were several efforts. I don't know if you're real familiar with our voter restoration process, but there's a lot of boxes you have to get checked and people you have to get sign off. But there's a weird period of 10 years in the middle of the law. So if you're a felon, I can't tell you the years right offhand, but there's a 10-year period where the process is different. For no reason we can determine whatsoever. So if your felony is within the last 10 years, you have to do X. If your felony was in the 10 years preceding that, you got to do Y. And then if you go to the 10 years preceding that, you go back to X. So what some of our members tried to do last year was make it all the same. And they took the highest bar to just make it all same, to remove some of the combating things that had to be done and make it one clear process so everybody knew what it was and it wasn't confusing depending on the year that you got your felony. And there were several pieces of legislation drafted about this. And of course, the Republicans killed every one. And they said, this is a problem. We're going to come back next year with an idea on how to fix this. Well, let me tell you, whatever their idea is going to be to fix this, it will not be better. I can promise you that. So I'm very nervous about what they're going to come up with to address that issue, when they should just say, when you've served the time for your crime, you should be able to vote.
Mm-hmm. And, if I'm a person who's trying to reintegrate into society, how do you even navigate such a system? I mean, it just seems so overwhelming, so complex.
Everything is against you. And these people, so many of them have told me, well, they said I couldn't get my rights back. They weren't even aware that there was a process. Because several years ago, when I was working with the Obama campaign and volunteering, I got together with some lawyers to kind of figure out what the process was and how we could help people go through that process. And so we got the process down. And one of the things is they have to be signed off on by somebody from probation or parole or whatever. And we found out that person comes through Knoxville once a month. And so it's like, okay, let's get as many of these people on their, to be there so that they can get that portion of it taken care of. And we really got into a good space with, but then when those lawyers move on, then, it's really, really tough to navigate this. And we shouldn't have to, what is it, 1/5 of, or is it 1/5 or 1/4 of the black men in Tennessee can't vote? I mean, this is not okay. It's just absolutely not okay. And maybe 1 out of 8 total can't vote of everyone. I can't remember the number, so I don't want to quote. I'll just tell you the number is shocking, but it's not one I use a lot, so it's not one that's right in the forefront of my mind right now.
And I mean, you're no stranger to speaking out when you feel that it's required. Last year, of course, you drew national attention, you and your colleagues, the Tennessee Three. I still see it in headlines. And so, given that you drew so much attention for speaking out on gun violence and on, school shootings after the tragic Nashville school shooting, how will you, I guess, bring that type of energy to the Senate? Because I think that we need more energy, more, people speaking out.
We need to, people who look like me especially need to speak up and speak out. And we need to stand with those who are being oppressed. And we need to call it out. It's not going to change. We were in a situation 10 and 15 years ago in my state. People just cared about their community and they pitched in and worked together when there's a problem. And I'm not saying there's been racism forever. I experienced that at a very early age in a horrible way. And bigotry and misogyny. But it used to be a shameful thing to be publicly. And currently we have leadership that talks just like white supremacists and Nazis. In Nashville, we've had 3 groups of Nazis this year showing up in Nashville and marching. And when I say Nazi, I mean they literally carried swastika flags. And it's because they come here, because that's the way Marsha Blackburn says the exact same thing these Nazis were saying on the streets in Nashville. Bill Lee, our governor, says the exact same thing that these Nazis were saying on the streets in Nashville. Our supermajority says the same thing. Nazis feel welcome in our state because of our Republican politicians and the way they're talking. It's not how the Republicans in my community feel. It is the extreme mentality. It is their being drunk on power and making it okay. I mean, there was a rally against transgender people on the Capitol, and Marsha Blackburn was there with some of the leadership from the state legislature. And they literally made a pathway for Proud Boys to come in and stand at the rally. I mean, they are welcoming these people, and it is not who we are. We don't ask who you love, where you came from. We don't care what color your skin is. We just want to help everyone and lift up everyone in our community, but not these folks. They are trying to other anyone who won't bow to their rules, believe how they want them to believe. I never met people who were so scared because some people disagreed with them. I never expect a Republican after I win to agree with me. We can have conversations though. We can talk about the best ways to solve the issues. We don't have to hate each other. That's folks out in the community, which is totally different than these elected Republicans who allow nothing that deviates from what they believe. And it terrifies them to encounter people who don't look like them, love like them, worship like them, or think like them.
Thank you for tuning in to today's Candid Q&A with Tennessee Representative Gloria Johnson. For all up-to-date news on elections and voting in the courts, please subscribe to one of our free newsletters.